The realization that I had a potentially strong legal footing was one thing. Translating that into effective action was another entirely. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I couldn't navigate the treacherous waters of a formal legal dispute alone. The thought of facing Mr. Peterson, or worse, a lawyer he might hire, armed only with my own research and righteous indignation, was a recipe for disaster. I needed a professional, an advocate, someone who understood the intricate dance of landlord-tenant law. The search for such a person became my next all-consuming mission. My days were spent hunched over my laptop, not just researching laws anymore, but researching the lawyers who practiced them. I scoured online legal directories, read countless client testimonials, trying to discern genuine competence and commitment from slick marketing. Each firm's website was scrutinized, every lawyer's biography pored over. The process was fraught with anxiety. There was the financial worry. How could I possibly afford legal fees when my housing security was already so precarious? Would any lawyer even take my case seriously, or would they dismiss me as just another tenant with a grievance? Making those initial exploratory calls was an exercise in vulnerability. I remember my voice trembling slightly as I first explained my situation to a firm's receptionist, trying to condense months of escalating harassment and a bogus eviction into a coherent, compelling summary. Some responses were brusque, others were polite but ultimately unhelpful, citing conflicts of interest or a caseload that was too full. But with each no, my determination paradoxically grew stronger. I meticulously organized my evidence binder, preparing a concise summary of events, determined to present a clear and compelling case to whomever would finally listen. After several dead ends, a recommendation from a local tenant advocacy group, which I'd contacted anonymously online, led me to the website of Sharma & Associates, a small firm with a stellar reputation for championing tenants' rights. Their lead attorney, Miss Anya Sharma, had a biography that resonated with me, a history of taking on tough cases and achieving favorable outcomes. With a mixture of trepidation and a renewed flicker of hope, I filled out their online consultation form, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I poured out the essence of my ordeal. The email inviting me for an initial consultation with Miss Anya Sharma herself arrived 2 days later, and it felt like the first genuine ray of sunshine I'd seen in weeks. The appointment was for the following Tuesday. I spent the intervening days in a fever of preparation, rehearsing my narrative, ensuring every document in my evidence binder was perfectly ordered and easily accessible. Walking into the Sharma & Associates office was a new experience. It wasn't a grand, intimidating corporate space, but a modest, professional suite that felt both serious and welcoming. Miss Sharma greeted me personally. She was a woman in her late 40s, perhaps, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a calm, composed demeanor that immediately put me somewhat at ease. As I sat across from her polished wooden desk, I launched into my story, my carefully prepared summary giving way to a more impassioned recounting of Mr. Peterson's escalating campaign. I walked her through the timeline, presented the text messages, the emails, the photographic evidence, and explained the context behind the audio recordings I had made. She listened intently, nodding occasionally, her gaze unwavering, interjecting only to ask precise, clarifying questions that demonstrated a quick grasp of the nuances of my situation. There was no judgment in her eyes, only focused attention. When I finally finished, laying out the eviction notice as the culmination of his efforts, a heavy silence filled the room for a moment. I held my breath, the culmination of weeks of fear, anger, and desperate hope hanging in the balance. Miss Sharma leaned back in her chair, looked thoughtfully at the array of documents I had spread before her, and then met my gaze directly. "Alex," she said, her voice calm but firm, "based on this evidence and your account, Mr. Peterson's actions constitute a clear pattern of harassment, and this eviction notice appears to be retaliatory and procedurally flawed. You have a very strong case, not just to fight the eviction, but potentially to seek damages for the distress he has caused." The words washed over me, a wave of profound, almost overwhelming relief. It was more than just validation. It was the assurance that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't alone, and that the law could indeed be a shield. We discussed her fees, which were reasonable, and she even outlined a possible payment plan, understanding my precarious situation. By the time I left her office an hour later, the heavy stone of anxiety in my stomach had lightened considerably, replaced by a nascent but powerful sense of empowerment. The silence from Mr. Peterson's end finally broke, not with a conciliatory phone call, but with a stiff, formal letter from a law firm I didn't recognize, indicating he had, indeed, sought his own legal counsel. The letter was a masterclass in attempted deflection and minimization. It acknowledged receipt of Miss Sharma's communication, but characterized my meticulously documented claims of harassment as subjective misinterpretations of standard property management practices, and the eviction notice as a regrettable but ultimately justified business decision based on accumulated concerns. There was no apology, no concession, only a thinly veiled attempt to reassert dominance, suggesting that perhaps I was the unreasonable one. His lawyer proposed a without prejudice meeting to discuss an amicable vacating of the premises by Alex, perhaps with a minor gesture of goodwill, which translated to them still wanting me out, but maybe offering a pittance to make me go quietly. Mr. Peterson even attempted a more personal and utterly clumsy countermove. One evening he, coincidentally, bumped into me by the mailboxes, his demeanor an unsettling blend of forced affability and underlying tension. "Alex," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, "all this legal business, it's so unpleasant, isn't it? Surely we can sort this out like reasonable people. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. I always thought you were a good tenant." This transparent attempt to bypass Miss Sharma and appeal to some non-existent prior goodwill after months of calculated cruelty was not only insulting but also a significant tactical blunder. I politely but firmly stated that all future communication should be directed through my legal counsel. His smile faltered, replaced by a flash of his now familiar irritation, before he abruptly turned and walked away. Miss Sharma was almost gleeful when I recounted this. His attempted direct contact after engaging lawyers was a sign of his unease and lack of discipline. Miss Sharma responded to Mr. Peterson's lawyer with unwavering resolve, her letters methodically dismantling their attempts to downplay the harassment and justify the eviction. She reiterated our position, backed by the evidence, and firmly rejected their paltry offer of a gesture of goodwill in exchange for my departure. She also highlighted Mr. Peterson's recent attempt at direct communication with me as inappropriate and a potential breach of good faith in legal discussions. The legal pressure began to mount in more tangible ways. As per our strategy, Ms. Sharma filed a formal complaint on my behalf with the city's Tenant Protection Department, submitting a comprehensive package that included our correspondence, my evidence logs, and a summary of Mr. Peterson's unlawful actions. This step moved the conflict from a private dispute into the realm of official regulatory oversight. The department duly notified Mr. Peterson and his lawyer that an investigation had been opened, requesting a formal response from them regarding the allegations of illegal eviction and landlord harassment. I imagine the sinking feeling Mr. Peterson must have experienced upon receiving that official communication. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one tenant he could bully. It was about his conduct being scrutinized by a city agency with the power to levy significant fines and sanctions. His lawyer's subsequent communications with Ms. Sharma became noticeably less arrogant, their tone shifting from dismissive to cautiously defensive. They requested extensions, they asked for clarifications, they seemed to be scrambling. The carefully constructed facade of the confident, all-powerful landlord was visibly cracking under the sustained, methodical pressure of the law. The true extent of Mr. Peterson's desperation became apparent during a mandatory mediation session arranged by the Tenant Protection Department. This was a formal, albeit less intimidating, precursor to a potential public hearing. Ms. Sharma and I attended, armed with our meticulously organized case file. Mr. Peterson arrived with his lawyer looking visibly stressed, his usual air of smug superiority entirely absent. He fidgeted, avoided eye contact, and when the mediator asked him to present his side, his explanation for the eviction notice was rambling, contradictory, and utterly unconvincing, even with his lawyer attempting to interject and smooth things over. He tried to paint himself as a long-suffering landlord dealing with a problematic tenant, but his vague accusations crumbled under the mediator's calm, persistent questioning and Miss Sharma's pointed requests for specific dated evidence he clearly did not possess. At one point, when Miss Sharma presented a particularly damning audio recording of him making a clearly threatening statement, Mr. Peterson actually blurted out, "Well, she provoked me into saying that," an inadvertent admission that further damaged his credibility. His lawyer looked aghast. The mediator, a seasoned professional, listened patiently to both sides, but it was evident from her expressions and the direction of her questioning that Mr. Peter— Now, let's get right into it. And that's where we'll leave Alex for today, cornered, but with a plan slowly taking shape. What do you think will happen next? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this part of the story and want to see how Alex turns the tables, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next episode with more of this gripping tale. Thanks for watching.